Critical Blast, where pop culture gets blasted.
And good evening, everybody out there in Critical Blast land. Sorry, but you're on the other side of this screen. That's where you are. You can call it the internet all you want. I have my own name for it. So it's been a day. As a child of the 80s, I was a bit taken aback, I guess, today to learn that Eddie Van Halen passed away. Eddie Van Halen was my high school years. I mean, everything he did. If we'd had Twitter, it would have exploded in the 1980s when David Lee Roth was replaced with Sammy Hagar, because that was all that we could talk about, and it was pro and con and vociferous debates. But the music of Van Halen is just it's iconic, and it's going to be around. It's going to be getting a lot of play, I guess, in the near couple of days, because that's just what we do when somebody passes on us like that. Before I get into, my fellow Toastmasters would be very displeased with all the uhs I'm putting out here. That's because I have not really put a lot of thought into the Van Halen thing. It just kind of popped up on me as I was starting the stream up. So before I get into tonight's topic, I want to remind people what we've got coming up later this week. Tomorrow night, we are going to have Ruckus and Sky Lane, the writers and directors of The Devil to Pay, the suspense thriller that is currently playing on Amazon Prime. You can find it there. We'll have a link for it tomorrow. And then the day after that, we will be talking Pirate Queen, live with Mandy Summers and Clint Helinski. I'm looking forward to that. Always a pleasure to have Mandy and her friends on here to talk. And then Saturday after that will be the LCS Guys show. We will have special guest Bill Willingham from Fables, Elementals, a couple of books like that. You might have heard of them. All right. So one of the things about turning 50, which I did none of your business years ago, is that you become eligible for this thing called the AARP. And what they lobby for or lobby against, I don't know. I don't care. I got the magazine and I got the deal on Ancestry, which basically paid for my AARP membership and gave me change back. And since my wife is all over Ancestry and I got tired of spending all the money, I took the deal. But we get the magazine, and this is the one in question. And I saw up here in the corner right before I almost pitched the thing, The Last Days of Stan Lee. So finally, something in here that actually appeals to me that I want to read. And I have not, as of yet, read it. I've looked through it, glanced through it, got the gist of it. I was going to actually read it here with all of you tonight, but we'll see how far it gets. I did not scan the whole thing, but I did scan large parts of it. Scanned everything but the last page of it, so we'll see how that goes from there. A heartbreak and tragedy in 6 parts about the, parentheses, alleged abuse of the visionary Marvel Comics creator as told to me by those who swear they loved him, by David Hockman. And you can already kind of get a little bit of the feel for where David's coming from on this. And the picture they used to open this up, obviously, is an exhausted Stan Lee. This is in 2017. This was 3 years ago, 2 years before he died. No, 1 year before he died. Goodness. Yeah, we'd heard stories that, he'd just being overworked and put through the mill. He was just signing and signing and signing. Excuse me. I swallowed my air wrong there. This was in Dallas. I think I've actually been to this part of Dallas. This looks like the Westin Galleria to me. And if it is, there's a little store over here in the corner called Condoms to Go, which I've never understood because I don't know anybody who buys their condoms to use them there. They usually are to go. But that's the name of the store, Condoms to Go. And that's a little aside. If you pass through Dallas and you just need condoms by the crate, you go to Condoms to Go. So let's just start taking a look at this article and have some commentary on it. If you want to comment on it as well, you don't have to do it in the comment section, you're certainly welcome to. You can type away in there. Or you can click on the link and join us here in StreamYard, and we can just discuss the article as it goes along. So here's what David Hockman is writing about Stan Lee. Part 1, A Bag of Money. In April 2018, a video appeared on YouTube that changed everything. It was recorded on a cell phone at the Silicon Valley Comic-Con, a comic book convention where Stan Lee was a star attraction. In the grainy video, the 95-year-old creator of Marvel Comics Spider-Man, Hulk, Black Panther, X-Men, and others appears unable to sign his name, which is important to note because Lee and his handlers were there to sell his signatures for $120 a pop. A dark-haired man in his 40s, dressed like an MTV gangster in a black skinny suit, black fedora, and sunglasses, coached the barely cognizant writer through the task. I think we all remember when that happened. That was a sign that Stan the man was definitely in his declining years. Anytime we saw him on camera when he was in charge, he was always exuberant. So it was kind of sad to see him in that condition. The man, later identified as Lee's former business associate, Kia Morgan, spoke to Lee as if he were a child, schooling him on how to spell his name. Stan Lee. S-T-A-N. Morgan spelled it out again and again as comic book after comic book was slipped in front of the white-haired Lee. In the video, Lee looks unsteady, propped up in a chair while a line of fans snakes out of the frame, each waiting for a chance to meet their hero. Though only 58 seconds long, the video is painful to watch. In the dark humor of the internet, it came to be known as Weekend at Stan's, after the 1980s cult comedy film Weekend at Bernie's, in which two low-level insurance guys drag their dead boss's body around to persuade his friends he is still alive. Fans who observed this tragedy took to the event's Facebook page in outrage. That man is a legend, and you shuffled him around like he was a bag of money, one wrote. Well, that's because that's what Stan was to them. And I don't know if this video is still out there. I'm going to go see if we can. Let's look it up. Let's see if we can find the Stan Lee video here. I'm going to see what we can find on the old intranet here. We'll just steal it. I'm finding a lot of rants. I wonder if everybody just kind of took that down. Silicon Valley Comic Con. Yeah, here we go. Here we go. All right. We pause that. I'm going to share that. I said pause that. Let me get that particular Chrome tab shared. All right. Here we go.
Stanley, S-T-A-N-L-E-E. Stanley.
I think there was one though that he wanted like on the corner or on the top. No, they're on the middle. No, I thought there was one we wanted a specific signature on, but it should be fine.
We didn't keep track of it.
Yeah.
Stanley.
Quit moving the camera.
Stanley.
All right. Well, that was heartbreaking to have to watch. But yeah, that's the video they're talking about, and barely cognizant doesn't even come close, I think, to describing that. He was definitely out of sorts there. God, that's just. I know he's gone. I know he's a hero, but I hate that they paraded him out like that. So let's continue on with what we had here. A few days after the video was posted, The Hollywood Reporter published a detailed article documenting years of questionable activity around Lee, accusing his advisors of taking over his management and finances and using the aging icon to enrich themselves, while showing little concern for Lee's physical or mental well-being. Well, you can see why this is an AARP magazine, because the people who are reading it are getting up in years, yours truly excluded, of course. And, they have money they don't want to be taken advantage of. They might not have as money as Stan Lee had, or as much value at the very least. Reports of his abuse had been slowly gathering since the death of his beloved wife, Joni, in 2017. Strong-willed and outspoken, the British-born former model had run the Stan Lee family business with a firm hand. She had monitored her husband's bank accounts and tracked his appearances more carefully than Lee himself ever cared to. She had also been more adept at managing their mercurial daughter, Joan Celia Lee, called JC, which is likewise important to note because JC, 70, will become a player in this sad tale of, there's the parentheses again, alleged elder abuse. Well, see, you're already calling her mercurial. So we think there's definitely a slant here, and possibly, possibly a fair one, but we can see where you're coming from here, Mr. Hockman. But in the spring of 2018, Joni was gone. The shocking Comic-Con video was being seen hundreds of thousands of times, and a welter of accusations suddenly spilled into the public arena. There was talk of millions looted from Lee's bank accounts, his property scavenged, his physical condition deteriorating in full view of his legion of fans. How could this be? Well, how could this be? Could it be that, the legion of fans was the market that people were trying to take advantage of, as well as Stan Lee's notoriety? Possibly. If y'all quit buying the stuff, they'd quit dragging him out, probably. It's difficult to overestimate this man's influence on American pop culture. Films based on Lee's Marvel characters have grossed more than $22 billion worldwide, more than double the ticket sales of all the Star Wars movies combined. Lee was credited as a producer for many of these blockbusters, but what drew cheers were his acting turns in 39 of them. He was a crackerjack bit player, appearing on screen for 5 seconds or less. Vanity Fair noted that Lee might have surpassed Alfred Hitchcock as the most recognizable cameo actor in Hollywood, and usually dropping a droll line with a wink and a grin. Fans, when he died he had 3.5 million Twitter followers, couldn't wait to point him out as he popped up. Hey, look, it's Mr. Marvel himself. I don't know anybody ever called him Mr. Marvel. But I'm surprised that Marvel doesn't have a character named that. We have a Ms. Marvel. Where's Mr. Marvel at? Doesn't have to be a captain. He could be a stay-at-home dad kind of guy. Give us a Mr. Marvel. Get on that, Cebulski. After Stan Lee died on November 12th, 2018 in Los Angeles, former Beatle Paul McCartney said he counted himself lucky enough to meet him. Billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk remarked that Lee's contributions to humanity will last forever. A few months earlier, Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin had placed Lee right up there with Walt Disney as one of the greatest creators of characters, probably bigger. Well, to me, he's bigger, but since Disney's the one that bought Marvel, I guess the Disney was actually the bigger one, swallowed the smaller fish. But that's just looking at it from a financial perspective. As we approach the second anniversary of Lee's death, a half dozen civil suits are pending, and a criminal elder abuse prosecution by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office remains mired in pretrial maneuverings. The courts have yet to shed light on many of the details and the veracity of the elder abuse charges against several people. Elder abuse cases are difficult to bring to trial, tough to litigate, and hard to win. Was Stan Lee, like 1 in 10 Americans over age 60, a true victim of elder abuse, which can include physical violence, emotional torment, financial exploitation, and willful deprivation? Plenty of evidence and testimony suggests that may be true. I would definitely go with the financial exploitation part, simply because we've seen that in video and at conventions. But uncomfortable questions will arise along the way. Is it possible that our real-life hero, like many others in his situation, was complicit in his own abuse? And who will be the villain in this story? There will be plenty of suspects to choose from, but in the end, you will be shocked but not surprised. That means that in the end, David Hockman has picked a villain, and there is one. So we'll move on to part 2 then. An irresistible temptation. It was always about the cash. From childhood, Stanley Martin Lieber learned how to hustle. Lee recalled that his immigrant parents quarreled incessantly, almost always over money or the lack of it. As a teenager in New York City, he sold newspapers, delivered sandwiches, and worked as a movie usher. After high school, he wanted to go into acting or law or write the great American novel. But fate intervened when young Stan was offered an $8 a week assistant job at a Manhattan publishing firm owned by his cousin, Martin Goodman. In 1939, Goodman started a comic book imprint called Timely. Timely launched Marvel Comics #1, and Lee's destiny was set. He would work for Marvel for the next 75 years. Cranking out adventures and pulp crime dramas at $1 a page, Lee was so prolific that he adopted pseudonyms such as S.T. Anley and Neil Natz, spell it backwards, to make it look as if the publisher had hired a battalion of writers. Lee soon rose to be editorial director at the brand new Timely offices in the Empire State Building, as titles featuring Captain America, the Submariner, and the Human Torch got snapped up by the millions in the comic book boom of post-war America. Yeah, we used to sell millions of books. Can you believe that? If a book wasn't selling a million copies, it got canned. There's not a book out there that would have survived publishing in the World War II era. No, not a book out there today. That's sobering. But it turns out Lee's appetite for work overshadowed his desire to learn the ropes of financial security. Though I followed his career for decades and interviewed him at length on several occasions. Okay, so right here, David Hockner is stating as a fact, and it's a true fact that he has. This is not something where he's just decided to look back at Stan Lee's life. He's had interactions with the man. He's talked to him. He's interviewed him. So he's got a perspective to stand on when it comes to talking about Stan Lee. I was shocked, and still am, to learn he'd never held the rights to his stories. Marvel owned everything and always would. That's work for hire. Another surprise, Lee couldn't draw. His visual collaborators, such as Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, created the look and feel of each character and panel, setting up lifelong beefs around who deserved more credit. But none of them considered comic books consequential. In those early days, explains Michael Uslan, the producer of the Batman movies and a lifelong friend of Lee's, once a comic book was engraved and went to the printer, nobody thought it meant anything. They used their work to put their coffee on, to smudge out their cigars on. Yeah, the originals. I remember stories of Steve Ditko using original Spider-Man blue boards as cutting boards for other things he was working on. Priceless art just being ripped. As Lee told me in one of our interviews, you have to understand that growing up during the Depression, I saw my parents struggling to pay the rent. I was happy enough to get a nice paycheck and be treated well. Even as he built his version of the American dream, Stan and Joni married in 1947, daughter JC arrived in 1950, and they lived comfortably on suburban Long Island. Lee never had to take his finances seriously. Things were almost too easy for me, he wrote in his 2002 biography, Excelsior. If Joni wanted a new wardrobe or I wanted to get a new TV, I'd say, well, I'll write a couple extra stories. Those stories and Lee's breakthrough characters in the 1960s, particularly Spider-Man, changed the comic universe. Nobody had ever encountered, as Lee put it, superheroes with hang-ups before. People talked about these conflicted protagonists in the same breath as they spoke of Women's Lib, 007, and NASA. The 70s, 80s, and 90s weren't as generous. While Lee made a very nice living, he slipped even further, ever further, from ownership positions, even as comic books spawned blockbuster movies. The massive payday that seemed his due eluded him. When Disney acquired Marvel in 2009 for $4 billion, Lee continued to receive a relatively modest annual salary that never included a stake in Marvel movies or TV shows. After Lee moved to California as a Marvel ambassador in 1980, his personal efforts in movies and TV mostly fell flat, and studio executives kept him at arm's length on his own creations. His title, executive producer on films such as The Avengers, was mainly to keep loyal Marvel superfans from storming the studio gates. And that was a very smart move, because you're damn right we would have stormed the gates if you hadn't included him as an executive producer and wrote him a check for the same. In the life cycle of Hollywood fame, there often comes a time when looks fade and opportunities diminish, but the thirst for adulation and the need to pay bills does not. So, many an aging star begins a descent into the demimonde of live appearances, conventions, autograph signings, memorabilia shows, endorsements, and the like, all of which can generate quick, easy cash. That's what we go to conventions for. That's us they're talking about. Garbage bag full of 20s, as the Hollywood Reporter put it. It's a world that has welcomed the likes of O.J. Simpson, Mr. T, Mark Hamill, and the cast of dozens of beloved TV shows, most prominently Star Trek, though the needy fans nearly drove William Shatner insane. Oh, did we? He seems pretty capable on Twitter these days. He's a rather sharp guy. Mr. Shatner, if you went nearly insane from the fans, you can speak out to this. We'll tweet you. Let us know what you think. The massive fan gatherings known as Comic-Cons turned 50 last year, and they have remained, at least before COVID-19, an exuberant celebration of geek culture that draws 130,000 or more fans to larger venues. By the time Lee reached his 80s, his income revolved around constant appearances from San Diego to Tokyo to Abu Dhabi. A weekend's take could land as much as a book or movie deal, but between travel, scheduling, logistics, and demanding superfans, it is grueling work that required Lee to take on help. Okay, so getting ready to turn the page on this one here, but we've got some nice pictures here. This is Lee at 2018. Now this is after the 2017 appearance. He's looking pretty spry there. He's smiling, but he's with who? Chadwick Boseman, Jon Favreau, and Kia Morgan. So that's the same Kia Morgan who was teaching how to spell his name when he was exhausted earlier. And then over here on the right side, we got him in his office and with his wife Joni in 2004. Obviously a much stronger version of Lee here 13 years earlier. All was well for a while. The new second career generated piles of money for Lee, and his growing circle of advisors. Turn the page. See, I gave you that page too. And satisfied the writer's hunger for love and attention. But the Wild West nature of the business set him up for exploitation. As Paul Greenwood, a California prosecutor with experience in more than 600 felony cases of elder and dependent adult abuse, told me, cons can smell opportunity a mile away. The very qualities that industrious people of Lee's generation pride themselves on, working hard, trusting people, showing respect for authority, raising children to be better off, were traits that did not serve him well as he grew more vulnerable with age. On top of that, Lee didn't like banks and was thought to be stockpiling cash at home, an irresistible temptation for unscrupulous employees. And then there's JC, his daughter, never married, who tangled herself up financially and emotionally with a trio of men who had shady pasts and were later accused of chiseling away at a family fortune estimated to be worth between $50 million and $70 million. Stan and Joni had always worried about JC's stability. She couldn't hold a job. She spent too much. They created a trust, fearing she would blow through an inheritance and end up living in her car. JC's involvement in her father's affairs likely explains why things stayed hushed up for so long. People of Lee's generations are very private, said Renee Rosie, a deputy in charge of the Elder and Dependent Adult Abuse section of the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, which is prosecuting one of the criminal cases involving Lee's estate, though Rose herself is not involved in the case. They don't air their dirty laundry. So right here, you can see the finger is going to be squarely and pointed at J.C. Lee here. And since this is AARP magazine, it's not on the newsstands. This is going into doctors' offices and membership circulation. She may not yet be aware of this. I'm sure she is. I think she's probably been interviewed for it. In fact, I know she has because I read at the end of it some interesting bits that she told the writer point blank. And I think she might be threatening to sue, but we'll get there. I don't want to blow the lead on this thing. Part 3, The Protectors. I first met Stan Lee around 2008. He was 85 and brimming with vitality. Physically wiry, he was a quick-witted, fast talker in aviator shades and that famous lampshade mustache. When I asked him why he continued working long days and weekends, I thought he might hit me with a Thor hammer. I never want to retire, he announced with his sandpaper delivery. It's fun doing what I do. And clearly it was. His office was filled with framed photos of him with Hollywood stars and world leaders. Reagan, I heard, would wake up in the morning and the first thing he would do is read the Spider-Man comic strip, he let me know proudly. Stan Lee even had his own action figure and boasted about upcoming film and publisher projects. I'm doing something now with God as a theme, and it will be a big production, he said, waiting for my laugh. Between the time I met him in 2008 and his death in 2018, 3 newcomers inserted themselves into Stan Lee's life, befriending him and his daughter and offering support, counsel, and business ideas, but ultimately enriching themselves through their connections. Legally or not, we will try to learn. These 3 have since turned on one another, laying out the alleged abuses and misdeeds of their rivals while trying to absolve themselves in civil and criminal cases pending in Los Angeles County Court. They all accuse each other of stealing from the man they loved and idolized. I set out to talk to each of them to get their side of the story. And that's who the 4 people are in this little inset here on the left side of the page. This is Lee's inner circle. Clockwise from the top, there's Kia Morgan, Jerry Olivares, Max Anderson, and daughter J.C. Lee. The first was Max Anderson, a blustery, burly security guy who plied his trade at comic book events. In 2006, Anderson was assigned to coordinate Lee's schedule and help him navigate the floor at San Diego Comic-Con with its 100,000-plus Marvel-mad attendees. Lee and Anderson, both chatty, salt-of-the-earth types, became fast friends, and by 2007, Anderson was working with Lee's team to book and coordinate appearances at various events and monitor all the paydays. If Lee had been a little less trusting, he might have turned up Anderson's 2002 felony conviction for beating up his wife, for which he spent a year in jail. Anderson would be found guilty again in 2010 for hitting his son with a belt and slamming him on the floor. For that, Anderson received 3 years probation, a fine, and orders to complete anger management and parenting classes. It appears that Lee, his family, and his team of lawyers, managers, agents, and others never took note of that history. So what are we saying? Are we saying that he hit his wife and he hit his child, so maybe he hit Stan? God, I hope that's not true. That would be horrifying. By 2010, Lee was becoming, or had already become, completely dependent on Anderson for many of his commercial endeavors, according to a lawsuit filed by JC. 2 sources who worked inside Lee's circle, who asked to remain anonymous for fear of legal and physical retribution. Whoa, physical retribution. Okay, so legal retribution obviously means that, hey, if you print this, they might sue me. Physical retribution means that, Guido's going to come around and break your kneecaps. So this is getting interesting now if they're afraid of physical retribution. Anyway, the 2 sources who worked inside Lee's circle estimate that Anderson walked off with at least $8 million in cash and memorabilia from Lee. Anderson insists every penny and collectible was a gift from Stan Lee and Joni. So Stan must have really loved you to get $8 million in gifts. He recalled for me the day they first turned over their personal mementos to him for a Stan Lee traveling museum. Joni goes, "Come here, dear," and grabbed my hand. We walked over to one of the rooms, and she opens the door and she goes, "I want you to have this," pointing to the keys to the city, proclamations, and the like. I'm like, "Holy smokes, no, I can't." She goes, "We want you to," Stan says. "We want you to." Anderson's eyes well with tears as he tells me this. By 2012, with the first Avengers movie packing theaters and Lee's characters making it to network TV, Marvel's co-founder entered his 10th decade with a Sharpie practically affixed to his signing hand. Comic book dealer Chandler Rice, who coordinated signings with Lee and Anderson during these years, estimates that Lee was now autographing 1,000 items at each outing. 1,000. You go out and sign your name 1,000 times. Do you have any idea? I've signed books. My first novel had a 200 either 200 or 250 limited edition hardcover run. I had to sign 250. It took me days to do that because the hand cramps were horrible. And he's estimated to be doing 1,000 at each outing. That's insane. Fans paid $80 for each signed comic book, with Lee's team taking a $40 cut. At the end of each event, basically what would be handed to Max would be about $40,000 just to stand there and stand in the building and get him out. And by 2014, we had to pay him in cash, says Rice, whom Anderson cut out of the business later that year. Okay, so Rice, the guy who was setting up the signings, Anderson cut him out when he started being told he had to pay him in cash. JC's lawsuit asserts, and now JC's the daughter for those coming in late, JC's lawsuit asserts that Anderson collected more than $800,000 in cash and goods related to Lee's appearance at New York Comic Con in November 2017, and paid himself $700,000 as a management fee while giving Lee only $50,000. Okay, so this is New York Comic Con, 1 year, $700,000 fee, $800,000 collected, $50,000 to stand. You can do the math on that one. Meanwhile, the older man was left worn out and complaining he could not go on. Well, of course he could not go on. If he's signing $1,000 at an outing for a comic book dealer, imagine what he's signing at New York Comic Con. That's a 3-day event, and the man was in his 90s. God. The case is pending, mired in a pandemic backlog of court delays. In the midst of these signing marathons, I spent several days with Lee for a long Q&A for Playboy in 2014. He was 91, and I had to yell to make myself heard. He looked tired and griped about his pacemaker and macular degeneration. Okay, so he couldn't see. He's signing things that he can't see. And that was in 2014. But he still went to work 5 days a week, insisted that life with Joni was peachy, and swore he couldn't wait to get to the next speaking engagement or convention. Even if I've heard the question 800 times before, I always try to give an answer people don't expect, he said. Like, what superpower would you want? I say luck, because if you have that, you have everything. That luck was running out. The second man in question, Gerardo Jerry Olivares, first encountered Lee at an Iron Man 2 red carpet event in 2010, where he was doing publicity for a theater chain. They hit it off, and Lee soon hired Olivares to work with JC in hopes that he could help her find some direction in a show business career. Okay, so he's the guy works for theater chains. JC wants a show business career. Stan says, this guy might be able to help you. Come work for me and, on the side here, kind of steer my daughter into this career that she's wanting to get. Despite his fancy title of senior advisor, the diminutive, loquacious, that means he was short and he talks a lot, Olivares was mostly a high-priced babysitter. He collected $7,000 a month, one source told me, to accompany JC on shopping trips and help her brainstorm projects that might capitalize on her father's name. $7,000 a month. I want to do a little thing here I like to call math. I have to do it with a calculator because I want to be absolutely correct here. 7,000 times 12. That's an $84,000 a year job. Okay. And then we're assuming he collected at $7,000 before taxes. If he collected it after taxes, it's probably a $100,000 a year job or higher. But nevertheless, not a bad chunk of change if all you got to do is just take baby girl shopping and say, hey, why don't we have him sign these, or why don't we have him sign those? Lee apparently never checked Olivares' background either, oh boy, which showed 45 liens filed against him for failure to pay federal, state, city, and county taxes. Okay, so I guess we can assume it was the $84,000 before taxes since he doesn't pay them, as well as 15 court judgments totaling around $40,000. Stan Lee sued Olivares on April 13th, 2018, alleging fraud, financial abuse of an elder, conversion, and misappropriation of his name and likeness, involving broken alliances, abrupt expulsions, and allegations of elder abuse. The complaint alleges Olivares was involved in buying nearly $1 million worth of real estate in the older man's name, as well as stealing close to $300,000 and vials of Lee's blood. Okay, hang on a second here. He was making the $84,000 a year, we estimate. He was buying $1 million worth of real estate in the name of Stan Lee. And Stan didn't know about it. That's why Stan sued. Stealing close to $300,000, that's cash. It's over $250,000. And vials of Lee's blood. That's foolish. I mean, I don't know a diehard fan who would pay, something for somebody's blood. And I love Stan Lee. I would love to have anything with his name on it or memorabilia, but not his blood. What are you going to do? Clone your own Stan? Come on. Vials of Stan Lee's blood, kiting checks, and forging Lee's signature. Oh boy. To cause approximately $4.6 million to be transferred out of his Merrill Lynch account without his authorization. Okay, so he's signing Lee's signature not on comic books, mind you, but on checks to the tune of $4.6 million. This guy was a piece of work, if these allegations, in parentheses, are true. Olivares told me that he was the victim. Of course you were. Insisting he was acting out of a deep affection for his hero and committed to carrying out Stan Lee's legacy in the manner that he would want, with the respect and the dignity that it deserves. Is there anything wrong with that? Well, no, nothing is wrong with that at all. And I think it's totally worth $4.6 million to carry out Stan Lee's legacy after his death. You piece of shit. I'm sorry, I was talking to the dog that pooped on my shoe there. I was not talking about Olivares at all. The third Lee advisor, quote, quote, Kia Morgan, the man who was dressed like a caricature of a gangster and coached the nonagenarian through the signings at Silicon Valley Comic-Con, and that's the video we showed earlier. For those who are coming in late, you'll catch it on the replay. Said he met Lee around 2006, but became a prominent self-declared protector around 2016. A dandyish collector of celebrity memorabilia, he is the only figure so far singled out for investigation in the Lee abuse case by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. He was arrested in 2019 on felony charges of false imprisonment and grand theft from an elder and a misdemeanor charge of elder abuse, according to police. Okay, now this was in 2019. Mind you, Stan Lee is dead at this point. So Kia Morgan has arrested on felony charge of false imprisonment and grand theft of a different old person. And a misdemeanor charge of elder abuse. And why in the world is elder abuse a misdemeanor charge? I would really like to know that. If anything should be a felony, that should be as well. So that's where we are here. Let's turn the page. The details of Morgan's and others' relationships are complicated. Anderson, Olivares, and Morgan all wove in and out of Lee's life with an ever-growing range of opportunities, quote unquote, business ventures, and PR escapades. Olivares persuaded Lee to use his own blood, which is probably how he started stealing his blood, to mark collector's edition comic books and jack up the price. And then, as noted, allegedly stole the blood. Stan literally put his blood, sweat, and tears into this charity project and was excited and thrilled about it, Olivares told me. And there are photos of Morgan and Lee chumming around awkwardly with actors Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, singer Michael Bolton, and the King of Saudi Arabia. Once again, anyone who dug into Morgan's past could have spotted evidence of mischief and deceit. When I asked around in the memorabilia world about his reputation as a peddler of presidential and Hollywood collectibles, prominent archivists and curators practically begged me to expose his schemes. For years, he had hawked a secret Marilyn Monroe sex tape that he never produced. He claimed he slept with Lincoln's pocket watch, though that too was a canard. I tried to talk to him about all of this, but Stan Lee remained subject number one for him. Tending to Lee in his final years was a calling from on high, said Morgan. I loved the man. He's like a father to me, Morgan explained when we met at his lawyer's office last fall. That's when you always go to your lawyer's office to, present. He was like a father to me. Look what they did to my dad. He spoke nonstop for almost 6 hours. He's my childhood hero, and when he asked me to help him, I couldn't say no. Well, that would be an interesting conversation. I'd like to learn how Stan Lee met you and asked you of all people to help him. It doesn't matter if 1,000 liars write 1,000 articles. It will never, ever change my relationship with Stan, he added. You could see what I did for him, which was showing kindness, love, compassion, telling him how to spell his name. Holding his hand every day while it held the ink pen. And he didn't do that with anyone else because no one else was forcing him to sign his signature with a Sharpie when he was half out of his mind. Am I bitter? I'm starting to sound bitter. I told you I hadn't read this before I got into it. Okay, between Anderson, Olivares, and Morgan, it is hard to believe that there could be room for others to take advantage. But it was Lee's only child whose sources said appeared to control and torment him the most in the end. That might sound shocking, but it's hardly unusual. In almost 90% of elder abuse cases, the perpetrator is a family member, usually an adult child or spouse. It's a big reason so many cases go unreported, Renee Rose told me. The parental shame and guilt can be paralyzing. In the winter of 2014, Stan and Joni reportedly got into a spat with JC over a new Jaguar convertible leased under the family trust. JC was said to be furious that the car wasn't purchased outright for her. It's a rental. I don't want to be seen driving a rental. Daddy, buy the car outright, please. What began as a tantrum apparently turned into a shoving match. On a podcast about Lee's final days, his then business manager, Brad Herman, notice Brad Herman is not listed as one of the 4 inner circle people, but he is the business manager. So we don't know what he saw, didn't see, participated in, etc., etc. Just saying that that name is just now popping in here. Brad Herman claimed JC erupted in anger, grabbed her father's neck, and slammed his head into the back of a chair. Okay. Herman showed me photos of the contusion on the back of Stan's head, plus a big bruise on Joni's arm and burst blood vessels on her legs. He told me that Stan had begged him not to go to police for fear of destroying his daughter. I'm sorry, she's already destroyed. She's just still walking around in a shell of a human suit. Wow. I told you, he picked the villain already, and he's telling a good yarn here. Part 4, what just happened? By January 2018, in Lee's last year of life, his health was quickly deteriorating. That month, he was admitted to Cedars-Sinai Hospital with an irregular heartbeat and a shortness of breath. In a few weeks, he came down with a little bout of pneumonia, as he later told worried fans in a recorded video message. But it speaks to how desperate he must have felt. He dragged himself to his new lawyer, Tom Lala's office, in February 13th to sign a scathing declaration about the chaos inside his home on Hollywood's Oriole Way. In the document, Lee portrayed JC as a grown-up child with very few adult friends who has never had the ability to understand or manage money, even as she demanded more. He detailed her wild spending sprees and said that setting limits was useless. When JC and I disagree, this is Stan speaking, which is often, she typically yells and screams at me and cries hysterically if I do not capitulate. Nothing was enough for JC, according to the document. She had regularly fought for her parents to amend their trust in order to put assets and property deeds in her name, insisting that this is my money, I want my money. Such a change, JC's father predicted, would greatly increase the likelihood of her greatest fear, that after my death, she will become homeless and destitute. You can feel the father's heartache in every paragraph as he goes deeper into JC's association with what he calls the three bad actors, Oliveira's, Morgan, and JC's attorney, Kirk Schenck. Interestingly, Anderson was not named. I was just about to say that too. He didn't name Anderson. Lee said they worked their way into the financial dealings of a vulnerable woman without a support system who is an easy target for predators in order to gain control of my assets, property, and money. But then something inexplicable happened. Within 2 days, on February 15th, Lee changed his mind, or someone changed it for him. The writer's inserting opinion here, but maybe he'll back that up with something more based here in a little bit. But that's his opinion, or someone changed it for him. That's leading. Firing attorney Lallis and replacing much of Lee's staff. As the Los Angeles police arrived at Lee's home that day to investigate reports of elder abuse, it appeared that Kia Morgan had ascended to some lofty position that left him in charge of Lee's domicile and had swiftly taken full control of Lee's life and career. Morgan barred the doors and tried to prevent Lee's nurse, Linda Sanchez, and others who had worked in the home from talking to the officers and reporters, and may have forced some workers to sign non-disclosure agreements. Lee's longtime accountants were fired, and a new lawyer was retained. Lee's assistant of 25 years, Mike Kelly, suddenly required permission and supervision when visiting. Kelly didn't respond to multiple interview requests. Lee's home phone number and door locks were changed, and Morgan began monitoring and even writing Lee's emails. Twitter posts and public statements. I paused in the wrong spot there. Morgan began monitoring and even writing Lee's emails, Twitter posts, and public statements. Though in fairness, because of his failing eyesight, Lee had long required some help with those tasks. This was a Friday night massacre of the assistants at Stan Lee's place. With them being fired, the nurse not being let in, the locks being changed, the number being changed. This is where Kia Morgan was just basically. You might as well just step into a Stan Lee skin suit and zip it up. That's what Morgan was doing at this point. It was bedlam at a time when Stan Lee should have been savoring these days. That same week saw the national release of Black Panther, about an African Marvel character that Lee was most proud of. It would earn 3 Oscars and $1.3 billion at the box office. Instead, Lee was dealing with one new mess after another. On February 20th, Sanchez, the nurse, made a formal legal declaration that painted her work environment at the Lee home as a living nightmare, with JC constantly assaulting her father verbally and JC's lawyer, Schenck, acting like a schoolyard bully, demanding that Sanchez sign a non-disclosure agreement. When Sanchez announced she was pregnant shortly before leaving her job that winter, JC reportedly left unhinged messages on Lala's voicemail, suggesting that Stan might be the father. You know what? I hope Stan was the father. If I'm 93 years old and I can get a woman pregnant, more power to you, sir. You rule. Lee appeared in another recorded message in June, looking as forlorn as a POW, staring dead-eyed into the camera to assure everyone that he and Morgan were conquering the world side by side. The authorities were not buying it. In the middle of August, 3 months before Lee died, a Los Angeles Superior Court judge granted Lala's request for a restraining order against Morgan. It accused him of mishandling more than $5 million of Lee's artwork and money while attempting to isolate Lee further from his family by moving him to an undisclosed apartment. Morgan called it fake, fraudulent news. Well, that was the phrase to be used then, but then dropped out of sight. By the time Lee conducted the final media interview of his life, on October 8th, JC's attorney, Kurt Schenck, bragged that they'd kicked out the bad guys. When asked about the chaos in his home, Stan Lee did his best to give it a positive spin. There really isn't that much drama. As far as I'm concerned, we have a wonderful life. I'm pretty damn lucky. I love my daughter. I'm hoping that she loves me, and I couldn't ask for a better life. If only my wife was still with us, I don't know what this is all about. Stan, blink twice if they're giving you a script to repeat. Okay, before I go into part 5 here, I want to take a look at the pictures on the screen. This is the sad picture here that gets me. This is Comic-Con fatigue, and this is 2016. People are just, you talk about Weekend at Bernie's. Stan's asleep. He's passed out from exhaustion, and fans are still just like they come up, stand by, and get your picture taken with sleeping Stan Lee. If you had paid for that picture, and the gentleman's got his face pixeled out, and I understand that. If you had paid for a picture with Stan Lee, first of all, would you want to hang up a picture of you and Stan Lee's sleeping prone form? I wouldn't. I would say, look, the guy's asleep. Let him sleep. We can come back later when he's awake. For God's sakes, have mercy on these creators who are here to, interact with their fans, not to be turned into these signing mills. And then the picture on the next page here is that after Stan Lee's death. Of course, the fans had created a memorial on the Walk of Fame on his star. So that's kind of nice to see. Part 5, A Free Man That Night. On the last evening of Lee's life, he had his usual early supper. Plain fish, Remo Williams, man, I like him. A roll with butter, strawberry jello for dessert. It was a Sunday around 8 p.m., and Jonathan Bolerjack, his friend, driver, assistant, and perhaps one of the only people in Lee's inner circle who seemed to show true empathy for a man in his final days, left the house on Oriole Way, looking Lee in the eye and thanking him as he always did. Some nights I would leave and think, oh, this could be the night, because Stan didn't look that great. But he looked fine as I headed out, he noted. Looking back, I feel comfortable saying Stan was a free man that night. Kia was gone, Max and Jerry were long gone, and JC wasn't there then. I like to think his life ended on his own terms. Before bed, Lee enjoyed having one of his nurses read to him from the epic Persian poem, The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, with its ancient wisdom about living life to the fullest, including lines such as, make the most of what we may yet spend before we too into the dust descend. Sometime before morning, Lee went into cardiac arrest and respiratory failure. Someone called 911. JC drove over from her apartment and went with the ambulance and a security guard to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, where Lee was pronounced dead at 9:17 a.m. There was no autopsy, and he was cremated. His death certificate distilled his magnificent career to a single word: writer. I cried a lot. Everybody was crying, said Bolerjack, who arrived around 9:30 that morning. He admitted his emotions were mixed. I guess I read too many comic books where the heroes win and the bad guys go down, but that didn't happen, and that's what was upsetting. When I heard the news, I had a flashback to my times with Lee. One comment leaped out at me. I was asking about his influence and legacy as a towering great of pop culture when it dawned on me that Lee wasn't quite buying his own hype. To tell you the truth, I never thought of myself as much of a success, he said, and I couldn't tell it wasn't false humility. When I was younger, I was embarrassed about the things I wrote. I felt there were men building bridges, doing medical research, and here I am writing these ridiculous comic book stories. He admitted it was his years of interacting with fans that made him recognize some value in his work. He needed them as much as they needed him. Lee said, "People always tell me things like, when I was a child, my mother was gone, my father was drunk, but your comic books were there for me." And we're continuing on page 74, which I did not scan, so you don't get to read that one along with me. So I apologize, but there's not much more to go here. These characters are important to people in ways I can't even understand. But is that success? Is it being wealthy? I know a lot of people richer than I am. Is it being happy all the time? Nobody's happy all the time. But then again, I don't think anybody ever stops a bridge builder on the street and says, "Your bridges, they're thrilling." Part 6, and the final part, love and theft. The lawsuits churn through the system. Delays give way to delays, and the accused sit mostly at home like the rest of us this year. As with so many elder abuse cases, those involving the Lee estate will likely come down to he said, she said. Except in this situation, there's a three-ring circus of barkers and performers who may not have had Lee's best interests at heart, and a charade that went on for years. Call it the long con, but those types of relationships are much more difficult to pinpoint as being perpetrators, said elder abuse prosecutor Paul Greenwood. I always say that the longer the victim and suspect have known each other, the more difficult it becomes to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that undue influence was exerted over that person, because sometimes loyalty is rewarded. In a less lawyerly explanation, the villain in this story is love. Abuse of the elderly routinely cloaks itself in love, which is, in many cases, returned by the victim. The perpetrators might even call love their motivation. What makes these cases challenging sometimes is that you have potential suspects who appear to have shown the victim affection, allegiance, loyalty, and protection, Greenwood said. It can be difficult to distinguish between criminal motives and genuine concern. That's why we always look outside the immediate circle to neutral observers who didn't have rewards to gain and who weren't endearing themselves with opportunities to enrich themselves. And now Joan Celia Lee is in charge of her father's legacy. She owns the family homes and controls the finances of his massive estate. Even during the coronavirus shutdown this spring, she was in court pursuing rights to her father's intellectual property. I reached her on the phone one day after weeks of trying. With her father gone, I wondered why she was still suing everyone in sight. I asked gently, "So, what do you want now?" "I want everything that's mine," she snapped. "I want my museum. I want to do a restaurant, Stan Lee's Super Subs. I want to do a big Spider-Man Stan monument to put my family's ashes somewhere." At that point, she broke into sobs. "I want help. I'm the one who's been abused." J.C. Lee, the loving daughter, cursed and ranted and blamed her father's troubles on Hollywood, corporate greed, the evil media, and even Scientology. On the whole, she sounded like a woman engaged in battle, unaware that she had won the victory. The empire was hers. She told me she couldn't talk to me anymore. She told me to do whatever the F you want. She said she was going to write about me too. She said that God sees all. She threatened to sue me. Then she hung up. Schenck, her lawyer, wrote me back a week later on her behalf with an official-sounding email statement that painted JC as a misunderstood figure who really just loves and misses her parents. "My father and I were best friends," the email said. "I'm sure you've researched and heard how many public statements my father made about how I was his greatest creation and the love of his life, along with my mother. The three of us were inseparable my whole life. I may have frustrated them, and they certainly frustrated me on occasion, but we loved each other, and aside from private statements falsely induced by the recorder in each instance, the record reflects this." So that is the end of the story there. Nobody has commented on it, although I know we had people watching, so I guess I held your rapt attention. I'd love to hear what people think about this. It's a heartbreaking story. This is, I'm kind of glad I wasn't on camera reading some of this, because I was getting angry in places and upset in places to hear some of the things that would have been done to this man, this great man. And I know I say great man because yes, I'm a fan too. I get that, and I get that. There are also stories that say that Stan wasn't so great of a person, but I don't know that I prefer that the evil that men do be interred with them and the good live on after, to counter quote Mark Antony in Julius Caesar. So with that being said, boy, that took an hour. I did not know that was an hour-long article to read. Yeah, I agree with you. It is saddening and horrifying, and when you read about it, it's one thing. It's one thing to know that millions of dollars are being stolen. That's theft. That's just a common crook. But when you read the parts like blood being stolen, being pushed into chairs and hitting the back of your head, and then you see his hand holding the pen and telling him how to spell his name. Yeah, I know that people got Stan Lee memorial collectible stuff in his last years, and I'm sure they treasure it because it might have been their only opportunity to have ever met Stan Lee. I wish for Stan that he could have quit doing the convention circuit 5 to 10 years earlier while he was still in his prime and just enjoyed himself at home. That might disappoint some of the fans who later got to meet him. Or at least not do the grueling con circuit that he was definitely doing, being taken to cons by cons. Let's face it, because they were just draining his money. Anyway, obviously the point of the story is beware of elder abuse, because it is the AARP magazine. For those who didn't see it, I don't know where you can find it at. It's not really on. I don't think it's on store shelves. I don't know if you can get it at like a Barnes and Noble or what. But if you can, then more power to you. Go get your own copy of that. Yeah, we love Stan Lee. We will always love Stan Lee. Nothing's ever going to diminish that. And I hope that these lawsuits. I don't know who the lawsuits work out for. Stan is gone. Joni is gone. So I guess all the money would go to the estate, which would end up going to Joni or go to JC. And who knows if that's justice anymore. So anyway, thank you guys for coming. I appreciate y'all for being here. Again, I just want to remind you all that tomorrow night we will have Ruckus and Lane Skye on here, the writers and directors of The Devil to Pay, streaming now on Amazon. And then Thursday we will be live with Mandy Summers and Clint Helinski to talk Pirate Queen, which is their new crowdfunded comic. Look forward to seeing you then. If you haven't subscribed and you kind of like what we do here, or at least put up with it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring that bell. You know the drill. We appreciate every one of those that we get here. We just try to come back every night and bring you new content and promote as many writers and creators as we can. So with that, we're going to bid you a fond good evening and go out there and do something fun with your life for the rest of the night here. Take care.
Hi, thanks for stopping by for another Critical Blast video. The internet is a big place, and we know there are lots of other places you could be other than here, and we appreciate you being here immensely. If you enjoyed this kind of content, we hope you'll return for more. If you click the subscribe button, you'll get a little notification of when we produce new video content. If you would like to help the channel out, there are many ways to do so. Just visiting our main hub, criticalblast.com, will do wonders. But if you're more of a show me the merchandise type of person, there are links in the description of this video to our t-shirt shop, as well as links to Amazon for the books we publish under the Critical Blast Publishing imprint, including the urban fantasy anthology Gods and Services and the YA superhero novel Bulletproof by Stephen J. Mitchell. Thanks again for visiting this video. We hope you had a blast.